Okay, welcome everybody to our fall 2025 Q&A session for the Lawns to Legumes grant program. We're excited to have you here. Um, if you haven't already watched our kickoff webinar, which was last week, I recommend that you do so, as that gives a really nice overview of everything you need to get started on your pollinator habitat project and request reimbursement. The recording for that is on our grantee guide and in the follow-up emails that we'll be sending you. But for tonight, we're going to be addressing questions that folks had during the kickoff webinar and also that were asked to us afterwards. If you do have questions that you've brought with you or that come up throughout this session, you can use the Q&A feature that's located at the bottom of your screen. You'll see that Q&A button. You can go ahead and type your question in and hit send. You can also view other people's questions, and you can upvote them by clicking the thumbs up icon next to each question, and that will help us prioritize the most popular questions. We'll first, as I mentioned, be going through the questions that we already received, and then at the end, we'll answer as many of the ones that have come up tonight as we have time for. So again, who we are, we went over this in the kickoff webinar, but we have representatives here from the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, which is the state agency that funds this grant. And then we have Blue Thumb and Metro Bloom's staff who are here helping coordinate the grant program. Maybe we'll do some quick introductions if you haven't met us already. My name is Megan. I am on the education team at Metro Blooms and Blue Thumb. And then maybe Dan, if you want to introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dan Shaw with the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources.
Betty, I'm Alexandra Zerzan. I use she, her pronouns, and I am on our education team here at Metro Blooms Blue Thumb, and I work closely with Megan on the Lawns to Legumes project.
And then we also have Graciela, who will be active in our Q&A tonight. So I already went over this, but we'll jump right into the questions that we received from the webinar last week. We have several different categories, so we'll be kind of grouping questions by categories, starting with planting questions, then site prep questions, maintenance, eligible expenses, and reimbursement request related questions, and then some miscellaneous questions. And I am going to pass it to Dan to go through the planting questions.
Okay, thank you, Megan. So our first question is, can my project be a combination of project types, such as a pocket planting plus an adjacent native tree? And the answer is yes, you can do multiple project types. Quite often this adds benefits for pollinators. Our second question is, can I add or expand onto an existing garden for my lawn to legumes project? And the answer is yes there as well. There's no need to remove any plants, and it's okay if you decide to add native plants into an area that has some non-native plants. Just remember to take before and after photos so our team can see what has changed with that planting. The next question is it recommended for fall to plant plants or seeds? Really, that's your individual choice. Either can work in the fall. Here's some considerations for both containerized plants and for seeds. With containerized plants or plugs, they're typically the best choice for beginners and smaller gardens. You'll have more control over your layout and design with containerized plants. And the plants will have a higher survival rate. Plugs will also establish and bloom faster within your planting. For seeds, they can be a cost-effective way to introduce diversity into a larger pollinator planting, but it can take much longer for the plants to grow. For new gardeners, it may be difficult to tell the sprouting native plants from weedy plants within those plantings, so that can be one challenge. We recommend buying locally produced native seeds to help protect nearby native plant communities. That's where our list of vendors is really helpful. Avoid generic wildflower seed mixes from sites like Amazon, as these usually contain cultivars or non-native plants within those mixes. The next question is, can a pocket planting be done around an existing tree or shrub? The answer there is yes, it can be beneficial to plant around trees and shrubs. You can do a pocket planting around or under an existing tree or shrub. There's a number of shade-loving native plants that really thrive under shade, under trees, and we have a design template for shady dry sites that's great for those conditions. We recently added a dry understory design template to our resources, so that could be really helpful for those areas. And then local pollinator expert Heather Holm also has a resource called Soft Landings with more native plant suggestions for planting under trees. The next question is, what method would you recommend on an incline or sloping ground? It's helpful to create terraces in these conditions. It might just be small terraces around your plants, or it could be bigger terraces. And this will help slow the water down in those conditions. It just helps to slow it and capture the water. To prevent water from running off when you try to water your plants, when you are planting your plants, it's helpful to create a little divot, a little hole there for the plants to kind of fill in on the downslope side with soil or mulch around the base of the plants. You can also do that with some small rocks just to create a little bit of a dam to hold back that water that would otherwise flow down the slope. Also water slowly, that'll help the water soak into those sloping conditions. And many of our native grasses are really beneficial for slopes and controlling erosion. So it's helpful to make sure you're including native grasses. They're very deep rooted, and that's part of the reasons that they're very effective on slopes. Our next question is, do you have to cover your planting area in mulch if you are sowing seed? And the answer there is no. Seed does not establish well coming up through mulches. After sowing the seeds, you should not cover the area with mulch, as it can block light, prevent small seedlings from emerging. Instead, you can use a germination blanket or a straw erosion control mat designed for seed establishment, where the seeds can come up through that. These materials also help maintain moisture for a planting. They protect the soil from erosion and just keep that seed in place while they're allowing light to come through for the seeds, which is really important. Once the seedlings are established, you can consider adding mulch between the plants to suppress weeds, so that can be a later stage to add that mulch into those plantings that had been seeded. Next question is there a recommendation about how far away from the home's foundation can I plant trees and shrubs? This really depends on the plants that you're installing. For shrubs, we recommend around 2 to 5 feet away from the foundation, depending on the size of those plants. And then for trees, you'll want to plant them at least 10 to 15 feet away for a small tree, and then even further for a larger tree. You might be getting 20 feet or more away for a really large tree. Next question is, what suggestions do you have for areas that you're interested in planting but have invasive species? Do you have suggestions for preparing soil in areas with invasive plants? Generally, it can be really difficult to establish native pollinator plantings in areas where there's invasive plants. So they need to be removed first through that area. Focus on a small area at first if you can't take on a really large area. Small infestations may be controlled by repeated pulling of plants in the spring. That can be really beneficial. Larger infestations may be mowed several times in a season to kill plants and prevent seeding. Be sure to mow plants in early to mid-May before they bloom and produce seed. Many of our invasives, once they're in bloom, their seed is ripening, so it's getting to be too late to remove them. Mulching or pollinator planting will also help with weed control. Some people put cardboard down over their garden bed and cut out holes for their desired plants. So you can also use that method, or use edging around your garden bed. Something that you can insert a few inches into the ground can help create a weed barrier. Some of our weeds, like even Kentucky bluegrass, will creep underground into plantings, and that's where edging can be helpful to create that barrier between those plants. And then more frequent weeding can also be important. If you're working with a larger area of land and need technical support, managing invasives, or preparing your site, we recommend reaching out to your soil and water conservation district, which are quite often associated with the county government. The Monarch Joint Venture also has a working lands help desk that provides free technical assistance for pollinator habitat projects. The next question is, where can I learn about the rules for planting in boulevards? As mentioned in the kickoff webinar, if you're planning to do a pocket planting in your boulevard, which is a strip of land between the sidewalk and the street, it's important to check what your city or town's height restrictions are, because they do vary. Some cities like Minneapolis will have different height restrictions if your planting is on a corner, and that's pretty common as well. Plants can be a little taller further away from the corner where there needs to be visibility. For Minneapolis, you can view the current boulevard planting guidelines at a link that we can add into the chat here. And that's my last question. I'm going to turn it over to Alexandra.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan. We'll go ahead and get into some site preparation questions next. The first one being, for sheet mulching, is it okay to use cardboard that has labels on it? So if you're doing a sheet mulching prep, you want to do your best to remove as much tape and labels, anything that has kind of like a plasticky coating that you know isn't going to break down in the soil. You want to get that off before applying it to your site. It's also really important to try to avoid using cardboard that has a lot of dyes on it. So I'm thinking especially of like printer boxes that have a nice glossy sheen showing like a picture of the printer. That's not going to break down as well. You want to look for cardboard that is the typical brown is going to be best, but that kind of like softer paper coating is what's going to break down the best in your soils. Our next question has to do with, if you're removing sod physically, what do you do to dispose of sod if it's not good quality? So the first thing you want to do is check to see what yard disposal sites are in your area, and if they will accept the sod. Sod generally is not accepted at in like a yard waste debris or curbside pickup bin. So you will want to check those specific yard waste disposal sites. Some cities have stopped accepting soil and sod at yard waste sites because of jumping worms, which is an invasive worm species that can really do a lot of damage to soil health. So your municipal yard waste may not accept it, but you can still look for a landscape supply center that maybe offers industrial composting, and they may accept it because they have a process that composts everything at a higher temperature that's thought to kill the eggs. The safest thing you can do if you think that you have jumping worms is to prevent the spread of it and keep them on your site. So you could put it somewhere on your property, thinking of clever ways to use it, like creating a small berm so that anywhere where your landscape is really flat, you could start to add some elevation to it. You could fill in a low spot. You put it up against the side of your house, or just find an out of sight place to spread it. But know that you could also flip your sod over and layer it with newspaper and soil, or use some in the bottom of any raised beds that you have if you're not too concerned about weeds coming up through that. our next question, is it beneficial to add compost to the soil? In most cases, for native plants, you don't need to add any soil amendments. They're really well adapted to our native soils and can do well in even really poor soil conditions, what we think of as poor soil conditions. So they should do, if you're picking native plants that do well like in your soil type, they should do well in your original soil. You would just mulch on top of the open dirt to protect it during that time. That being said, if you have heavily compacted soil, adding compost can really help, especially when starting a new planting. You can do sort of that loosening of the soil and adding compost as an organic matter, which can help the soil retain more moisture. It adds nutrients to the soil, and it helps boost that microbial activity in the soil, which is all really good for soil health and ultimately for plant health. One way that you can do this if you're not wanting to do like adding a ton of compost all at once, is you can add a handful of compost in each planting hole, or work 1 to 2 inches of compost into the top few inches of your soil before planting. The one thing I want to just clarify, stick this point in here again, we only reimburse for compost as a soil amendment, never topsoil. So if you have poor quality soil or really compacted soil, we will not reimburse for bringing in a bunch of new topsoil. We highly recommend using compost as a natural amendment to your soil. Next question, should a soil test be done for native plants, and how can I do a soil test? So sort of a similar theme that you're going to see with this question is that soil testing often doesn't need to be done for native plants because they give oftentimes complex information about remediation for soils or different like fertilizer levels that need to be added to soils that just doesn't apply to native plants. Native plants do very well in your current soil conditions. Maybe though you're concerned about your soil because you've planted things there before, maybe you've dabbled in native plants before and they always seem to struggle growing in it. You can do a soil test through the University of Minnesota Soil Testing Lab. The tests have a different kind of range of options that you can do. Generally, the lowest cost one provides some decent information about like the existing state of your soil. However, it's not going to be a reimbursable expense under the Lawns to Legumes grant. Occasionally, local nurseries may also be equipped to kind of work with you in your soil, take a look at it, and you can bring them a sample and they can at least walk you through like the structure of your soil. Is it clay? Is it sand? Is it loam? And help you choose plants that would do best. Next, we're going to jump into maintenance questions. The first one, is a doozy since it's not on my list, but I'll do my best to answer it here. Herbivore protection. What are mesh nets? Are they available for purchase? I have bunnies and deer in my neighborhood. Megan, I'm wondering if you have any insight in terms of like the specifics for eligible expenses on the herbivore protection.
Yes, I believe that this question was in regards to the photos of the little baskets that we had over individual plants um, when we showed that last week at the kickoff webinar. And I think the ones shown were literally like trash baskets that someone bought like at a Dollar Tree or other discount store. And then in terms of eligible expenses, it's any sort of fencing protection. Repellents for herbivores are not reimbursable, but any sort of barrier. So chicken wire is a really popular one that you can get at most hardware stores. And you can buy a material that is easy to cut so you can kind of shape it either around like individual plants or your whole planting, depending on your specific project.
Thank you so much for that context, because mesh net, I was not envisioning what we just talked about there. So yes, we've had plenty of people who, you know, if you, I think we had mentioned this in the webinar last week, if maybe you're planting into an existing flower bed that you don't want to do fencing all the way around it, you just want to offer some protection to those smaller plants, those like you can just put chicken wire around just those, or you could do some of those little like mesh trash baskets over top of them to offer some protection. Thank you. Getting back to my script and expected order here, the next question is, will we want to cut back what we plant this year when it dies back, or do we just let it die back and cover the ground for the winter? We typically recommend keeping your fall yard cleanup as minimal as possible. All of that, what we call duff or dead plant material, is really incredibly important for helping wildlife over winter. And by wildlife, we are 100% talking about pollinators. Leaving dead stems is really important because some of Minnesota's native bees overwinter in the hollows of plant stems. So we recommend leaving those stems standing, and then in the spring, after the dandelions have started blooming, you can cut them back to typically between like 12 and 18 inches is what we usually recommend, above, or just 12 to 18 inches tall, so that the plant stems are still standing, offering some support for the new growth that's coming in. Keep some of your dead flower heads out if you have any. Seeds from native perennials like coneflowers is a huge one. Joe Pye weed and black-eyed Susans help feed birds throughout the winter, and you might see some birds visiting your seed heads, which is a special treat. And then let your leaf piles just be in your garden beds and under trees, because many butterfly and moth species overwinter in that leaf litter. So it's incredibly important for our pollinators through our harsh winters. Our next question is, when can I expect my new plants to actually start blooming? Native plants, when you put them in the ground, we know they take some time to grow in, but we promise that the wait is worth it. They will bloom eventually, and then they will continue to bloom with lower maintenance than many other plants. So the kind of little saying that we tell everyone is that natives, the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap. So in that first sleepy year, leafy green vegetation with few to no blooms is what you're going to expect. Your plant is really focusing on developing those leaves that are going to offer support to the root system. So you'll want to make sure that you are regularly watering those plants and pulling competitive weeds around there to give them a little boost. In year 2, when the plants start to creep, quote unquote, they'll start to spread and fill in. They'll start to take up a little bit more space in your garden, and some may even start to bloom for the first time, which is going to be really exciting. And they might even start to creep a little bit by spreading some of that seed after they bloom. In the third year, you can expect your garden to be pretty mature. So your plants will be much more dense. All of them will likely be blooming at this point. Their roots should be pretty settled deep into the ground, and watering will only be needed in periods of extended drought. So give them a little bit of time. That third year, your garden will really come into its own. I'm going to hand it over to Megan for some additional eligible expenses questions.
Thank you, Alexandra. I'm going to be going over what is reimbursable and what is not, so you can get the most out of your Lawns to Legumes grant. So a few folks asked, where can I get a list of native plants that are reimbursable? So the thing is, there are hundreds of plants that are native to Minnesota, so we don't have a single exhaustive list. However, if you're just not sure where to start, we do have a number of plant lists that are on our resources page on bluethumb.org. And those lists cover themes like if your garden area is in a sunny location, What are some sun-loving native plants, or a shady location, or a boulevard? We have design templates as well that include not only a list of recommended plants, but some recommended spacing for how you arrange them in your planting bed. So I recommend that you check out our resources page for that. And then we also have a plant finder tool on bluethumb.org. When you go to the homepage, it'll be right in the upper right-hand corner. And I think we talked about that in the kickoff webinar. It's a database that has about 300 or so native plants in there that are more commonly found in nurseries, and you can use the filters to get a list that's specific to your site conditions. Next question, do we need to buy native plants at one of the gardening locations on the native plant nurseries list on the Blue Thumb website? Or can we purchase native plants from places like Gurdon's? So you are not required to shop from the retailers on our Minnesota native plant nurseries list. However, if you do choose to shop from a big box store or a real retailer not on our list, we do recommend using some extra caution, especially to avoid those cultivars and cultivated varieties of native plants, which are not reimbursable. Those are usually either just more common or kind of mixed in with the straight natives at big box stores or other garden centers. We do have a native plants versus cultivars handout that's on the grantee guide that goes through some tips for how to tell the difference. But if you want to be safe, I would recommend sticking to the locations on our native plant nurseries list, which is linked on the grantee guide. And if you don't have a nursery from that list near you, there is the list does indicate if the native plant nursery offers shipping and delivery, and delivery fees are reimbursable. Can I find supplies on Facebook Marketplace? Is it reimbursable to pay for native plants from a neighbor, for example, or another place without an official receipt? So the answer is yes. For scenarios like these where there's not an official receipt, we do have something called a cash receipt template, which is linked on the eligible expenses guide, where you can fill out who you bought it from, how much it was, the date. It's basically like an invoice template. So go ahead and use that to document that expense. If you're doing a transaction that's, for example, paying your kids to do labor for your project, or if it's another way where you don't have an actual physical receipt. If there is a way to get one, please take the effort to get a receipt, but if there's simply not because the situation doesn't have one, then we do have that template for you to use. Next question, I have a neighbor who received a grant in the past. She plans to give me a bunch of plants from her garden, and I will likely spend most of my grant on borders and a mulch. Is it okay if very little of my grant money is not spent on actual plants? First of all, that's awesome that you're getting some free native plants. Yes, it is fine if you acquire your Minnesota native plants through a neighbor or through another free or low cost method. Just make sure that your project does indeed involve the addition of those blooming native plants in some way. If you have a situation like the question asker here, where you end up not with any receipts or purchases of native plants, even though you acquired them a different way, we do ask that you still send us a list of what native plants you added to your garden. You can either type out a list, or if there are plant tags, you can take photos of the plant tags, and those plants should be visible in your after photos as well. So we just need to have that documentation that you did add some blooming Minnesota native plants to your project. Does the grant only cover products or also services? Having someone get rid of invasive plants, for example. The answer is yes. So this is on the eligible expenses guide. You can be reimbursed for hiring helpers or hiring consultation, design, installation services, and that can include any essential site prep work directly related to your project. For example, if there's invasive plants right on the site where you're going to plant. Again, just stressing the point that the ultimate goal of your project is adding new native plants or trees. So the whatever services you're paying for has to be in relation or in service to that goal. And then just make sure that any contracted work is being done through your grant period and it wasn't something that was done in the past before you received your award. And again, if you're hiring helpers like family or neighbors, you can use that cash receipt template to make a receipt. Can we trust retailers to know if plants meet the eligibility requirements? So I would say it's important to do your own research and verify that the plants you plan to purchase are indeed Minnesota native. It's pretty easy to look up the native range of a plant using either the USDA plants database or the Minnesota wildflowers site, which are both linked on the grantee guide. Retailers that are on our native plants nurseries list are going to be more informed both about native plants and the Lawns to Legumes program. So I would say you could trust those folks. Do let retailers know that you are not looking for cultivars of natives, because if some people just hear natives, they'll think both cultivars of natives and natives. So it's important to communicate that since cultivars are not reimbursable. Is a native flower seeds mix acceptable for reimbursement? So we can only reimburse seed mixes that are made with Minnesota native seeds and seeds that are not cultivars. If you're looking at a mix that has kind of a generic title like wildflower seeds, and it doesn't detail exactly the species that are in it, we're not going to reimburse that because we can't confirm that the species within that mix are Minnesota native. There are a number of retailers on our Minnesota native nurseries list that sell all Minnesota native seed mixes and seed packets. So I recommend checking out those options first before going to more of like a national scale site to buy your seeds. Are all Minnesota plants going to be considered native for all regions of the state? So this person is from near the Canadian border, so they think that their region has a slight difference from much of the Twin Cities. So yes, it's true that even within the state of Minnesota, some plant species, their native range is restricted to certain regions of the state or certain counties. For the purposes of the Lawns to Legumes program, any plant that is native to any part of Minnesota will be reimbursable. However, especially if you're from pretty like up far north in the state, your planting is going to be more successful if you choose plants that are native to your region. The Minnesota wildflower site is especially good for checking this. They have a map that shows within the state the native ranges of different species. So I recommend checking out that. And I believe the Plant Finder also has some region specific filters that you can use the Plant Finder on bluethumb.org. If I replace the dirt patch with only the approved low growing fescues, not adding in clover or any beon plants, is that reimbursable? So fescues are a type of grass that is a component of a pollinator lawn. If you are only purchasing and only incorporating grasses or fescues in your project, the Lawns to Legumes program cannot reimburse that because the program is specifically focused on creating pollinator habitat that includes those nectar and pollen resources. So you'll need to include some kind of blooming or flowering species to be installed as part of your project. If you're looking into pollinator lawns, we do have a number of retailers on our list that specialize in that and sell pollinator lawn seed mixes and the different components of the species that we approve for those. So I recommend looking into that. How much do you need to spend to get reimbursed? So there is no monetary match requirement for the Launch to Legumes program. Whatever amount you spend up to $400 that is eligible for reimbursement can be reimbursed. We consider the match aspect of Launch to Legumes that time investment. So we have that requirement that you need to spend at least 2 hours of time on your project. So just make sure that you're tracking your time, and we'll be asking for that when you fill out your reimbursement request form. Can my beon be a work in progress, such as starting the seed in bare spots and expanding the seeding later? Yes, for a beon or for any of the project types, your project can be, for this grant season, one stage of a longer term project if you like, as long as the specific phase of your project is done during your grant period, which is now through the November 30 deadline. So making sure that you're getting some kind of blooming native plants in the ground in that period. We can't reimburse you if you, for example, purchase seeds that you don't sow before the November 30 deadline, unless, of course, you ask for an extension. Can cypress mulch be used? So any type of mulch is reimbursable. However, we don't recommend using cypress mulch because it's typically or almost always unsustainably harvested from cypress swamp habitats that are in the southern US and other places. So that's not a great option in terms of sustainability. Also, we recommend avoiding dye mulch as that's not going to be great for your plants. And then we talked about this in the kickoff webinar, but we recommend shredded hardwood mulch because it will stay in place really well. But if you're having a lot of trouble finding shredded mulch and you are only finding chips, that will be reimbursed. Are rocks an eligible expense instead of mulch? So no, we don't recommend using rocks as mulch. A big reason for this is weeds can come up through the rocks and it can become quite difficult to maintain. And mulch is just going to be ideal for that water retention. Mulch can compost and help promote soil health. Your native plants can also seed and spread more easily with mulch as well. Would we be able to put down some top soil to help raise our garden area a bit? So Alexandra, I believe, already talked about this, but topsoil or soil is not reimbursable. Compost is reimbursable, and it's a good option if you're interested in amending your soil and mixing it in. The only case in which soil is reimbursable is if you're doing it specifically for a container planting project. So you're putting the soil inside of a container or inside of a raised bed, and materials, including soil for container and raised bed projects, are reimbursable up to $100. Are there any approved native trees with edible fruits for humans that I could add to my project? Yes, there are a number of Minnesota native trees and shrubs that provide fruit that is both edible and yummy for humans. A few you might consider are service berries, black chokeberry, native cherries, and American plum. And there's more than that as well, but I would recommend those off the top of my head. Some of my receipts are not detailed. Will we need to keep or document each species we purchase? So yes, if your receipt does not show the actual names of the common names or the scientific names of the plants that you purchased, please do keep a list of the plants that you purchased that are associated with your receipts. Another option is to save the plant tags, and you can take a photo of the plant tags, and we will ask for that documentation when you fill out your reimbursement request form. This was also mentioned at last week's webinar, but we have a project tracker spreadsheet for you to both track your receipts, but also the plants that you're using. It's on the grantee guide. It's a little hard to find. It's right at the top of the plan and install your project section. And we might be able to put the direct link in the chat as well. And now I will pass it to Alexandra to close off with some miscellaneous questions.
Yeah, these questions are kind of fun, so I'm excited to get to answer them. The first one, where do bees overwinter? So we talked about this a little bit with that fall maintenance, but it really depends on the bee. So some of our native bees are ground nesting, and they will dig a hole into the ground to overwinter or use like an abandoned rodent hole. And this includes the rusty patch bumblebee, our state bee. Other bees are stem nesting. So like I had said before, they will make chambers and overwinter in the hollows of stems. I think things like wild bergamot has a hollow stem, and those will often have lots of little bees in there. But that's why it's so important to leave your stems standing over the winter and keep leaf litter on your garden beds so that bees and other insects actually have that overwintering habitat to come back next year. You can also leave some bare, undisturbed soil or rotting wood for ground nesting bees. And the University of Minnesota Bee Lab website has some really great educational resources on Minnesota native bees and how they overwinter if you're curious to learn more about specific species. The next question we got on bees is what type of plants are good for leafcutter bees to cut? So if you haven't seen this before, native leafcutter bees will cut these small circular pieces from leaves and petals to line their nests. It's super fun if you catch one carrying its little leaf back to its nest. But they really like smooth, non-hairy, pliable leaves. So there are many native plants that fit that description, but some options that you may consider are bee balm or monarda, which is what I have seen leafcutter bees in my yard particularly favor. Asters are another good option, and golden alexanders, which bloom earlier in the year, so might be a great addition if you're looking for an early summer, late spring bloomer. But native leafcutter bees also have a wide range of native flowering species that they will visit for pollen and nectar. So making sure you have a little bit of everything is always helpful. Next question, can we get more than one Lawns to Legumes sign? Unfortunately, we only have funding to provide one Lawns to Legumes sign per grantee, but there are many other organizations that have some really fun and educational pollinator signs that you can either purchase online, or some of our native plant nursery retailers actually have them available too. So we recommend checking out the Xerces Society or Monarch Joint Venture for some of those educational signs, but know that they will not be reimbursable under the Lawns to Legumes grant. Only a stake for you to install your Lawns to Legumes yard sign is reimbursable. I hope I didn't say too many words that made that really confusing. Last question here. I never got a link to join the Hive. Oh no. You actually probably did and maybe just missed it. So the link to the Hive is in the email that was sent to you after you filled out the confirmation form, but we are also going to post the direct link in the chat for you to join. And I will do that now while we start handing it over for some additional questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Alexandra. So we have about 15 minutes to cover questions live. I'm going to answer one question that I see here from Amy. Will it not work to plant seeds or plugs too soon before the first frost? So for plugs, you want to plant them at least 6 to 8 weeks before the first frost. So to be safe, I would recommend planting on the earlier side of the fall planting season in September. When it comes to seeds, that's a little different. For some seeds, you can do what's called dormant seeding, which is actually sowing them right before the first major snowfall. And that's actually going to be pretty helpful for the seeds because that snow cover is going to protect them, first of all, from any animals that will eat them. And it'll also activate their natural winter dormancy cycle. They have to go through a period of what's called cold stratification, where actually those immediate cold temperatures are going to trigger a process that helps them germinate in spring. We do have a dormant seeding guide or handout that is on the resources page of our website. So if you're interested in dormant seeding, I would recommend checking that out. Somebody asked, we have a tree that drops a lot of leaves in our yard. Is it okay to allow the leaves to stay on the newly planted pollinator lawn? And the answer is yes. For plantings that are under trees, that's going to provide important habitat. When it comes to like a newly sown pollinator lawn, I think that's also okay. I don't know if either of my teammates has anything to add to that for pollinator lawns specifically.
Yeah, I think if the leaves are getting too thick on newly planted plants, I would remove them while they're still establishing. Once they go into winter, then it's okay to have the leaves on top of that planting, and they can be a few inches thick. It's just in the spring, if they're too thick for some of those plants to come up, you may want to move some of those leaves to another bed just to allow those leaves to come up, or the plants, but they can come up to a couple inches of leaves.
Great, thank you. Jenny asks, how can I get connected with the gardener to determine the best option for planting at my home? Alexandra, do you want to take that one?
Yes. So we will be sending out a survey in early August to get matched with a coach. So if you are interested in getting matched with a coach who can help with your project planning, do look for that survey in the August newsletter. It takes us a couple of weeks to get everybody matched, but it is our goal to match as many people as possible. Just know that our coaches, they are all volunteers. They all have different kind of specialties of knowledge. So we can't guarantee that they'll be able to answer every one of your questions, but we know that they can be really, really helpful. So look for that in August.
Great. Another question, what do you recommend for weed barriers around shrubs and or trees? Is that one you want to take, Dan?
Sure. Yeah, in most cases, we would recommend using cardboard, similar to the herbaceous plants, to suppress weeds, and then putting wood chips over the cardboard. In some cases, wood chips might be enough. It would depend on the weed competition that you would have around those shrubs. But cardboard helps create an extra barrier for weed competition. We don't encourage more synthetic type weed barriers. They tend to show up again in those landscapes eventually. We just don't like using plastics and other materials in the landscape either.
Someone asked, may I use plants I dig locally on adjacent land? And I would say as long as you can confirm that they are Minnesota native plant species and that you have permission and are collecting those or transplanting those in a sustainable way. I don't know what type of lands you're gathering them from, but that would kind of determine what you can do there. But just in terms of lawn legumes reimbursement, if they are Minnesota native plants, then that is the main thing that we are looking for. If you're not sure, you can use a plant identification app, and then we would just need you to document what species they are when you're filling out your reimbursement request form.
I would note there, we wouldn't recommend it for a natural area. So we don't want people collecting plants from natural areas and moving them to their yard areas, since it's going to potentially impact those areas.
Yeah, definitely. We have somebody wondering about a resource to get advice, in this case for their cup plants that have taken over their rain garden. And this also brings up a broader question around like maybe how to manage a plant, like a native plant that has become dominant or aggressive, taking over a space, which can happen over time in a planting.
I can start with that one. So a cup plant is a unique plant. It gets very large. It can spread pretty quickly within plantings, particularly where it doesn't have much competition. So any aggressive native plant, you may want to cut it back periodically. That'll help decrease the height, might decrease some of the seed production. Might be good to share with neighbors if they need an aggressive plant. So just makes, it's always important to be putting the right plant in the right place where it's not going to become a problem for other diversity. In some cases, you can create barriers around some plants. And so maybe using cardboard and wood mulch around a plant that might be spreading by rhizome might be a way to kind of help contain that plant. But just separating them from time to time and maybe sharing those plants with others is a good way to decrease that population and provide plants for other people.
Great, thank you. Another person is asking, is it beneficial to put landscape fabric down under the mulch? No, it is not. And you're shaking your head, Alexander, so I don't know if you want to elaborate on that more.
Sure, I can jump in. So this is just to go back to what Dan had already said, that we don't recommend using any non-biodegradable weed barriers. So things like landscape fabric. What typically happens is that your mulch will break down naturally right on top of your landscape fabric. And now you suddenly have this barrier where you've got soil on top and soil on bottom and plastic in between, which is the worst kind of sandwich. You'll still start to see weeds growing up on top of the landscape fabric. You can struggle with having plants, develop enough root systems underneath. So we just typically say stay away from landscape fabric in general. It doesn't usually help with weed suppression long term.
Just one other note there. So quite often we want our native plants to spread within these plantings because that's going to provide the best weed competition. If you have gaps in between your plants, weeds can come in there. Once they start filling in, there's a lot less maintenance and there's just less places for weeds to establish. So that's another reason that landscape fabric isn't beneficial, is that it really prevents those plants from spreading.
Yep. Another question related to plants we don't want spreading and how to contain them. This question is, what are some native cool season grasses that can compete with smooth brome and reed canary grasses specifically?
I can start that one. So both of those are very aggressive non-native grasses. Smooth brome grass, there are natives that can compete with that. In some cases, they're warm season grasses like big bluestem and Indian grass, but also different taller asters and goldenrods are pretty competitive with them, particularly if there's some maintenance being done, like prescribed burning or some clipping back of the brome grass, just to keep it at bay. There are some cool season grasses too, like Calms brome or prairie brome can be competitive. Reed canary grass is even more competitive than smooth brome grass. It forms big clonal areas. There's a few plants that can grow in with that. Cup plant might be an option that could grow with it and provide some competition. Prairie cordgrass, sometimes big blue stem. So some of our native plants can kind of hold their own with that, but that is a pretty aggressive one.
Okay, I'm gonna change the topic here. Question asking, I would like to cut down the tall stems of my hyssop and asters before winter. If I leave the stems on the ground, will pollinators still be able to use them to overwinter? So first of all, you can cut them down, but still leave, as Alexandra mentioned, like 12 to 18 inches. That even that amount will still help and will cut down on that length. And I'm pretty sure that stem nesting bees will still take advantage of those ones on the ground. They may get disturbed more easily from like other animals moving about. But in general, you're still going to be providing some good overwintering habitat if you're leaving some amount standing and then also leaving those like stem clippings on the ground too. Let's see here. I'm not reading it, but I recall somebody asking, where can I find a large amount of cardboard to get for sheet mulching? Um, and I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts on that one. I believe something you can do is maybe like go to your local grocery store and ask them. Like they usually have an excess of cardboard. So that's something that you can try out. Um, Another option might be checking like Facebook Marketplace or like local buy nothing type networks and seeing, or just kind of doing a call out and seeing if anybody has any. We also have our grantee platform, The Hive, and we really want that to be a space where you can ask for resources, or if you have something that you want to share out, that's a great space for that as well. Um, Anything to add on that, team?
I was just gonna say, we've had people in the past who are usually the most successful when they develop a relationship with a business that they know gets rid of a lot of cardboard. So typically, once you ask and find someone that's willing to let you take it, you'll have more cardboard than you could ever imagine. Otherwise, dumpster diving is perfectly acceptable, and you'll often find a lot of good cardboard just driving around.
Somebody is asking, where can I find good organic compost? That I can't really give you any specific recommendations because that depends on where you live. But I would say do a Google search and see what you find. Um, Anything to add, Dan or Alexandra?
I think, oh, Dan, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say the Blue Thumb partners would be an option. So there's the Blue Thumb partners that are on the Blue Thumb website. They would be sources that sell compost, many of them, or could deliver it.
Great.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add is that getting it from a local nursery rather than a big box store is going to be a really good bet for finding organic compost. And oftentimes, not always, but getting it in bulk can be a little bit better than bagged compost.
Yeah. Somebody is asking, they have some roses that have been recently full of spiny gall. The roses are still thriving, but will the galls hurt whatever native plants they add to their space?
Yeah, I
I
can
don't think
answer
so.
that.
Yeah.
So some of the cultivated roses get a gall from the larvae of a wasp, but I've never seen that on any of our wild roses. And very few of our native plants seem to get galls other than goldenrods, Canada goldenrod and giant goldenrod, but we don't tend to plant those in plantings because they're pretty aggressive plants. So usually not an issue with native plants that we're planting.
Thank you. Um, Dan and Alexandra, are you seeing any questions that I missed that we can do in the last minute that we have? Maybe we can answer Jean's question. I would like to replace a dying redbud with a native tree or shrub. Is the tree removal reimbursable? I don't think so, because the tree removal is not going to be directly related to your project, which is adding the native tree. But Dan, maybe you can confirm that.
Yeah, I would agree. The question has come up before about stump grinding, and those are costs that are above and beyond what we're working on with the program. So I would say that tree removal would not be covered under the program.
Thank you. Okay, we're at 7:01. I know we didn't get to every single one of your questions. So if you do have any remaining questions or any come up, you can do a few things. One is check out our grantee guide and our FAQ to see if the question has been answered already. Two is you can ask your question in the Hive, and we have both coaches and us program staff who are monitoring that. And then lastly, you can also email our program team directly at the L2L helpline email address. That email is on our website, and I'm also putting it here in the chat, and we'd be happy to help you have a great pollinator habitat creation experience. Thank you again for embarking on this journey. We're excited to see what you do with your grant. We do have 2 more optional project webinars coming up both next week and the week after. So you can refer back to your emails if you're curious about those. But for now, thanks for joining us, and I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.